people from ethnic minority backgrounds working in lower paid employment. This is one of the things that we've dealt with as part of the employer risk guidance, which we have repeatedly given in July and in September.
Lucy Allen.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, can I say what a fantastic job the Minister is doing in tackling some of the most difficult issues head-on. I pay tribute to her for her courage, and I would like to thank her for participating in the trial at Guy's and St Thomas's. And it is abhorrent that any member of this House should do anything to discourage participation in any such trial. And does she agree with me that it is the duty of every member of this House to work with our communities as leaders in encouraging participation in such an important trial?
I do agree with her, and as I said to the Honourable Lady, this is not something that should be a cause for division in this House. We should be working together on it. I didn't write the letter just to Conservative colleagues, I wrote it to all colleagues, and I hope that people will take up the notes that was in there and are able to share across their communities.
Maz Shah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad the Minister referred to her letter, because I've just had a huge check, and I certainly haven't received a letter from her as she's referred to our Shadow Deputy Secretary of State. Mr. Speaker, on the 19th of April, I wrote to the Secretary of State for Health and asked about languages specifically, offering my help and support in reaching ethnic minorities. I have a large minority. I come from Bradford, a diverse city, and Bradford West is one of the most diverse constituencies in the country. Again, I asked about languages commissioned in September in a written question, and as have others. And whilst I appreciate today the Minister has said we've spent $4 million, the truth is, whilst this debate has been going on, I've spoken to commissioners for Geo News, Dunya News, ARY, Channel 44, and £4,000 has been commissioned for the 12 channels that I know who communicate in the language of Urdu, and that's without speaking to all the main media, just whilst this question was going on. Sunrise Radio, the largest Asian radio outside of London, has had one campaign from the 2nd to the 7th of May in Hindi, Punjabi and Urdu, and now a campaign, nothing, Mr. Speaker, from the 7th of May right until the 19th of October. So how can she stand here and tell this House that they have been reaching out, BAME communities, and Jang newspaper had to go to Downing Street and negotiate for written, not for radio communication and not for TV adverts. So when will the party opposite get real about communicating honestly with black and minority ethnic communities in their languages?
We have published public health messages in over 600 publications. If she would like to write to me with places that haven't received communications, that's something I can take up with the Cabinet Office. But I myself have done quite a bit of media, BBC Asian Network and BBC Radio Manchester and other local areas, local media outlets. I have done lots of social media activity. We've had ethnic minority influencers reaching 5 million people. I'm sorry to say, if the Honourable Lady is not seeing these things, then perhaps she's not watching. But the money that we've spent is a testament to how hard we're working to reach people. There are still some hard-to-reach communities. That is why we're having the community champions, because at the end of the day, it can't just be TV, it can't just be social media. We need local authorities and people who know their local areas to be able to go out and find those people who still aren't hearing the message. And I hope that that's something that she will do. And I will find out from the House why she has not received the letter. It should have been sent to all colleagues, and I know many across the House have received it.
Tom Hunt.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I recently had the honour of becoming the ambassador for BSc Multicultural Services in Ipswich, which, as well as supporting our large and thriving Bangladeshi community, also supports people from over 50 other nationalities. Throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, they provided invaluable work getting food parcels to the most needy from those communities. But right now, their finances are under strain ever so slightly. I was wondering if the Minister could give both I and also the other leaders of the group some reassurance about potential financial assistance to them going forward.
I commend my honourable friend for the important work he's doing to support his community. The government agrees that charities play an invaluable role in this country, which is why we've committed a £750 million package of support specifically for charities, social enterprises and voluntary sectors so that they continue their work through the outbreak. And that includes £200 million, which is being distributed by the National Lottery Community Fund through the Coronavirus Community Support Fund. The fund closed to new applications on 17th of August, but about 97% of it, the total fund value, has been awarded as of 13th of October 2020. And in addition, 150 million has been released from dormant accounts to help social enterprises get affordable credit to people who are financially vulnerable and support charities tackling youth unemployment.
Video link. Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, COVID is a disease of poverty. The evidence clearly shows that there's a higher prevalence of and mortality from the disease in areas of high deprivation. In addition to people from Black, Asian and minority ethnic groups being at risk of COVID, disabled people account for nearly 60% of all deaths between March and July. They're more likely to live in poverty than non-disabled people, and also accounted for a third of the 300,000 people who weren't eligible for social security support in the spring. I understand that the Equality and Human Rights Commission are examining discrimination of disabled people during COVID, but what is the government doing to protect disabled people's lives and livelihoods in the second wave?
As I said earlier, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the government really takes it seriously, the outcomes for those with disabilities. There is a lot of work across government that is happening across very many departments. We are not leaving anyone behind. We're making sure that support is available, not just at national level through support schemes, but also through local authorities and through job security, through the Department of Work and Pensions locally. And if she wants more information on it, I'm sure it's something that I can write to her about. I don't have the full information to hand, but I do know that there's a lot of work going on across government.
Come to the last two questions now. Dr. Ben Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend and welcome this incredibly important and ongoing work. Does she agree with me of the importance of using science to determine individual risk as a way to help people make informed decisions about their lives and their work?
Yes, absolutely. It has to be evidence-led. Everything that we are doing within the Equality Hub is evidence-led. We have a real focus on data to make sure that we are basing our decisions on what is actually happening and not for reasons of politics or, of, I don't know, other things that are not science-based. So I do completely agree with him. I don't think there's anything to disagree with in what he said.
Shamura.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, and when in Tuesday's Black History Month debate I said I was angry that 6 months into this pandemic, all we seem to know is that black and ethnic minority people are 2 to 3 times more likely to die from COVID, but not why. The Minister intervened on me and said that today she would give me the answers. But I'm sorry, Mr. Deputy Speaker, she has not. She seems to be saying there's no link with ethnicity, but it's up to individuals to protect themselves. And the report is quite clear. It mentions factors such as socioeconomic background, but it does not say whether those factors are causes or correlations. And so I ask her again, when will we have the data-based evidence as to the causes of this heightened risk? And specifically, are they using artificial intelligence techniques to correlate the different factors so that we know why this is happening in our black communities?
I disagree with the Honourable Lady. I think we have answered the question. Saying that something is a factor means it's having an effect. It's part of the reason. So she's saying it does mean that. We've said, asking for the cause of COVID, what's causing the disease is people catching it. It's a contagious disease. I mean, this is not rocket science. What we are explaining is why certain groups are disproportionately impacted. We've explained that it's household size, it's population density, it's geographic, it's socioeconomic factors. All of those things are having an effect. And we've also explained, I know where she's getting to, but we've also explained that for some groups, when you take out comorbidities, the disparity is completely gone, like with Bangladeshi women and white women. I'm sorry that the report is not giving her the answer that she's looking for, but that's where, as my honourable friend rightly said, we're basing it on the science, not based on politics.
I'd like to thank the Minister for her statement, answering 39 questions over an hour, and I'd also like to thank the technicians, as many of the questions were virtual. Thank you very much. Point of order, Nick Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I've received very poor responses from government ministers in recent weeks. I asked about the withdrawal of Randoc's COVID-19 tests. The responses didn't answer the question. I asked about stocks of flu vaccine. I've heard nothing. I asked about customs agents at our ports. The answer was derisory. Just 6 words. We're trying to do our job and hold the executive to account, but this Parliament is being short-changed.
Hear, hear.
Anybody would think the government is trying to block scrutiny and hide its poor performance.
Hear, hear.
Can you please, Mr Deputy Speaker, advise me if it's the Leader of the House who is best placed to help me seek straightforward answers from his Cabinet colleagues to reasonable questions from members of this House?
I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for the advance notice of the question that he's given. The Speaker has repeatedly called for departments to give a higher priority to prompt and substantive answers to parliamentary questions at this time when accountability is of great importance. The Honourable Member is right about the role of the Leader of the House. He could make his own representations to the Leader, but I do hope that the Treasury bench will have heard the point of order, will get that message across to the Leader of the House and to all government ministers and departments. Thank you very much. We're now going to come on to the presentation of the bills, and after that we will then suspend for 3 minutes. Presentation of Bill, Raymond Shishti.
Marriage Authorised Belief Organisations Bill.
Second reading what day?
15th of January 2021, Mr Deputy Speaker.
15th of January 2021. Thank you. We're now going to suspend for 3 minutes in order for the dispatch boxes to be sanitised and for the safe departure and arrival of various key players. Oh, yeah.
Order. Order.
We now come to the general debate on COVID-19. I call Secretary of State Matt Hancock to move.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The House meets today to debate the corona pandemic once more. And the peril of the pandemic has no short-term quick fix, but calls for ingenuity and commitment and resolve from us all. We've responded with one of the greatest collective efforts this nation has seen in peacetime. But this fight is not over, and the virus continues to spread, and cases and hospitalisations and tragically deaths are all rising. Yesterday we learned that Liverpool Hospital Trust is now treating more COVID patients than at the peak in April. And across the UK, the number of deaths have doubled in under a fortnight. And yet, just as the situation we face is grave, so the hope of a solution is growing. And with every day, my confidence in the ingenuity of science to bring resolution grows. But until that moment, we must have resolve. And Madam Deputy Speaker, we're focused on finding a long-term solution. We reject political point scoring. And I call upon this House to work together in the interests of our whole nation and indeed the whole world. I absolutely will.
I just wonder whether one of the problems that we've got at the moment is that we haven't actually really got enough capacity in the whole of the NHS to be able to take on COVID in a long-term way, as he's suggesting, and still be able to do all the things that we really need to do. How are we really going to be able to ramp up that capacity so we're still treating people for cancer, for brain injury and for all the other things that we all care about?
He's absolutely right, and this is a challenge. He represents a seat in Wales. This is a challenge in the NHS in all four nations of the United Kingdom. And one of the things, I was going to come on to this, but one of the things that we have learned in the first phase is how we can do better to keep running the other services that the NHS must provide and should provide, of course, for instance, for brain injuries, for cancer treatment, for heart patients, and for those things that are not life-threatening, but that harm people's lives, a painful hip, a cataract that needs treatment. And in the first wave, we knew so much less about this virus that many of those treatments were stopped altogether. In the second wave, we have two things at our advantage. The first is that this is a much more regional second wave, which puts more pressure on areas like Liverpool and Lancashire than elsewhere in the country. But it does mean that elsewhere the elective and the urgent operations can continue. But the second, just before I come to that, but the second difference we have is we know much more about the virus and how it spreads. So we've separated, for instance, the NHS out into green sites and blue sites. Green sites where we have high degree of confidence that there's no COVID, using testing and asking people to isolate before going in for an operation, so that people can have more confidence, because the central message across all parts of the UK is that the NHS remains open. But the final point I'd make, before giving way to the honourable gentleman, is that the best way we can keep the sorts of treatments that we all want to see going is to keep the virus under control.
Thank you, gentleman, for giving way. He has answered my question in part with the importance of green and red, because one of the big problems in the first wave is that people were frightened. Even if they feared that they did have cancer or some other condition, they were scared to go into the hospitals, and we have to reassure people that they can go there and they can be safe.
He's absolutely right. And in fact, we have an advertising campaign, Help Us to Help You, to make this simple point to people, that if you are asked to go to hospital by a clinician, then it is safer to go to hospital than not to. And in fact, we call it green sites and blue sites. Green meaning free from COVID, as we're as confident as we can be that they are. Blue, not red, because we still want people to come to hospital, even if they have to come into A&E, because there's only likely to be, at worst, as much COVID as in the general population, unless, of course, you're in a COVID ward treating only COVID patients. And so the NHS has learned a huge amount, both about the microbiology of the disease, but also about how to run health services in a world when COVID is at large. And I'll give way first here and then to my honourable friend.
I'm most grateful to my right honourable friend. Of course, this is a dangerous disease, and of course, cases are rising, including in my own area. So it's with some humility that I have a look at the daily excess all-cause deaths in all ages England, which show there's been no significant excess all-cause mortality observed in week 40 overall. I mean, isn't it the case that the good news in this second wave is that the disease is not progressing as it did in the first?
I want to keep it that way, Madam Deputy Speaker. And it's true that the all-cause mortality is around the typical levels for this time of year. And that's partly because non-COVID deaths are actually lower at the moment than in most years. But it's also because thus far we've worked to keep this virus under control. And we know by the basic mathematics of compounding growth and the exponential nature of the growth of any virus, that the number of deaths will increase if we see the number of cases increase exponentially, hence the need for the actions that we need, that we in this House have voted for.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank my right honourable friend for allowing me to intervene. On that point, a lot of my constituents were frightened to go to hospital because they thought they might get infected by COVID. With that in mind, and I'm quite sure my right honourable friend has thought of this, would it not be an idea to actually separate out, so you have a COVID centre of excellence, say using the Nightingale hospitals, where everyone goes there, and then the normal hospitals deal with everything else? Forgive me for raising this point, because I'm quite sure you've got a very good answer.
It's a brilliant idea. It's so brilliant that the NHS has spent the summer working on this concept. Now, we can't do it as perfectly as my honourable friend suggests. And the reason is the practicalities of treatment of COVID. For instance, if you have COVID and something else, then you need a normal intensive care unit. But the Nightingale hospitals are there, and in fact today, sadly, the Nightingale Hospital in Manchester is reopening. And we are making sure that within all the rest of the hospitals, either different parts of the hospital are either deemed blue or green, i.e. essentially COVID-free or at risk of COVID, or that different buildings are COVID-free or non-COVID, or in some cases whole hospitals are COVID green sites, as in you can't go there, you can't go into it unless you've been tested and tested negative, so that we can have a high degree of confidence. For instance, if we're treating cancer patients, we want to ensure that there isn't any COVID in there. And so we need these long-term solutions. And I would say that, like other liberal democracies around the world, we're wrestling with this question, as we have just wrestled in the last few minutes, with the question of how to keep people safe from this virus, whilst at the same time protecting other important things in life, our liberties, our livelihoods, and the things that we love. And that is what leads us to this strategy of suppressing the virus, supporting the economy, education, and the NHS to do all the other things that the NHS needs to do until a vaccine is available. And I reject the false choice that says we must pick a side and choose between a healthy economy and a healthy nation, because the two are intrinsically linked. If we were to, God forbid, let the virus unleash its full force, then the damage not just to the NHS and the hundreds of thousands of lives, but to our livelihoods too, would be catastrophic. And we can only get our economy and our society going gangbusters again if we drive this virus down so people have the confidence that they need to live their lives to the full. And drive it down we must. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a deadly virus, and yes, it reserves its biggest impact for the oldest in society, which means the rises in the number of cases amongst the over 60s gives me a lot of cause for concern. And, as we've just heard compellingly from the Minister for Equalities, about the impact of on people from ethnic minority backgrounds. But, the impact is not confined to these groups. The virus can affect anyone of any age and any background, and we've already seen worrying numbers of young, fit, healthy people suffering debilitating symptoms months after contracting COVID. Yesterday, a study by King's College London showed that 1 in 20 people with coronavirus are likely to have virus symptoms like fatigue, breathlessness, muscle pain, and neurological problems for 8 weeks or more. Yesterday I visited the cutting-edge long COVID clinic at University College London Hospital. I've met people in their 20s and 30s, unable to work, sapped of all their energy, living with the long-term effects of a virus that has completely changed their lives. So to anyone of any age, catching COVID can be very grave indeed. Long COVID underpins again our strategy of suppressing the virus until a vaccine arrives. Yes, of course.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend. When he came to the Health Select Committee a few weeks ago, he talked about long COVID and the fact that clinics were being set up to deal with long COVID. Could you give us, the House, an update on where that's got to?
Yes. These clinics are being set up. The London clinic is open, but we need to see these clinics right across the country, and the NHS has a programme now of rolling out clinics to be able to support people, and of course communicating to GPs, because primary care is often where people arrive with long COVID, because there appears to be no correlation between the seriousness of your initial illness and how long you can have these debilitating consequences. In some cases, people have no symptoms of the coronavirus initially, but then can find that they have months and months of fatigue and a brain fog and muscle pain, and they didn't know where it came from until they're diagnosed with long COVID. It is a very serious complication, of course.
For giving way, but in order to enable us to get a picture of this, could you tell us what percentage, say, of people from up to 25 actually suffer from this condition?
Yes. We have 2 points of evidence. The one is the evidence from King's College London that shows that around 1 in 20 people with coronavirus are likely to have these long-term symptoms. The other is that the other evidence actually implies that in the under 50-year-old adults, it's more like 1 in 10. So there does seem to be some correlation which implies that it is more of a problem amongst younger people. But understanding this is long COVID is still in early stages, and an awful lot of more research is needed. Yes.
Well, just to press that, but it's not so much the question of what percentage of those who contract the disease, but what percentage of the overall cohort is actually roughly actually affected by this.
Well, it's very difficult to know. We estimate that around 8% of the population have had COVID, and we estimate that around 1 in 20 people who've had it have symptoms for longer than 8 weeks. Of course, the fewer people get COVID, the fewer people who will get long COVID, and therefore it reinforces the overall strategy of suppressing the virus until we can get a vaccine. I want to now, if I may, Madam Deputy Speaker, turn to the question of how we do that. We cannot reiterate enough the importance of the basics of social distancing and hands, face and space. And the next area is through following rules on local action, which is at the core of how we, at the moment, and how an increasing number of other countries around the world are tackling the crisis. Through our local COVID alert levels, we've been able to take a balanced approach. And today I'd like to update the House on some further changes that we're making. Unfortunately, we're seeing rising rates of infection in Stoke-on-Trent, in Coventry, and in Slough. In all of these areas, there are over 100 positive cases per 100,000 people. Cases are doubling around every fortnight, and we're seeing a concerning increase of cases among the over 60s. So we've agreed in partnership with local leaders to move these areas into the high local alert level, coming into force at 1 minute past midnight on Saturday. The central change is that people cannot now meet other households socially indoors. This applies in any setting, at home or in a restaurant or any other venue. The rule of 6 still applies to any outdoor setting. And although you may continue to travel to open venues, you should reduce the number of journeys where possible. I'd like to thank local leaders in these areas for the work that they've done, for their cooperation, and I can assure the people of Stoke-on-Trent, of Coventry and of Slough that we'll support you all the way through, including with the business support that the Chancellor announced earlier today for all areas with a high local alert level. And we're also formally beginning discussions with Warrington about moving into the very high alert level due to a continuing rise in cases there.
that point. I thank him very much for the ongoing dialogue between myself as a Warrington MP and my colleagues in Warrington. I was particularly concerned this morning, having seen data from Public Health England about the rapid rise in the over 60s infection rate in Warrington. I wonder if you could just say a little bit more about that information.
Well, I am worried about the rise in cases, especially amongst the over 60s in Warrington. We've seen that case rate continue to rise despite the hard work of people locally since Warrington was moved into local alert level 2. There's an excellent local hospital in Warrington, but it is dealing with a very high number of cases and working actually with other local hospitals to ensure that everybody gets the treatment that they need. I pay tribute to my honourable friend, Madam Deputy Speaker, who has provided great leadership in his local community, and I hope that with everybody supporting these measures and taking the actions that are necessary, we can keep these restrictions in place for as little time as possible. But I'm absolutely convinced that we do need to make progress. And what I've announced today is that we will formally start the talks, and I hope that we can reach an agreement and a resolution soon. The virus moves quickly, and so we must respond quickly and in a targeted way like this to keep it under control. As part of local discussions, Madam Deputy Speaker, local authorities, including the LGA, have asked for stronger enforcement powers, and I agree. To support businesses who are doing the right thing, it's fair that we take action against those businesses who are doing the wrong thing. So firm enforcement helps make these restrictions fairer for all. So we want to put in place stronger regulations to give local authorities further powers to take further action in their area. The proposals that we'll bring forward will mean councils will be able to act without delay and use closure notices to shut premises on public health grounds to help suppress the virus. We'll work with local authorities in the coming days on the details of these proposals so we can act in a firm and fast way against the minority who are breaching these life-saving rules. Madam Deputy Speaker, these changes will help us fight the virus in the here and now. But we're also making progress on long-term solutions. The long-term solution is not to give up, as some would have us do, or to wish the problem away. It is to harness the science and the ingenuity of innovation while supporting people through. First, if I can turn to testing. Thanks to exceptional work from so many people, we've built a critical national infrastructure of diagnostic testing. Today's testing capacity is now over 370,000. And alongside this expansion of the current technology, I want to update the House on mass testing. Now, I know there have been many questions about this project. Last week, we began rolling out new testing technologies to hospitals based on the point-of-care LAMP test. That will allow the regular, repeat testing of NHS staff and patients. And I'm delighted to be able to tell the House that yesterday, we began the rollout of lateral flow tests to schools and universities. Lateral flow tests don't require a lab or a machine. The kit gives you the result within minutes. We've successfully purchased many millions of these tests, and they'll allow us both to find the virus where it spreads and to reduce the disruption that virus control measures inevitably create. If we can deliver a mass testing solution so pupils in a bubble don't have to isolate for a fortnight when one in the bubble tests positive, we will not only help control the spread of the virus, we will protect education better and help schools and teachers and parents to live their lives much closer to normal. These tests will also allow directors of public health to have more rapid access to testing capacity, and we're starting the rollout to councils, including today with the council in Stoke-on-Trent. The second area to touch on, Madam Deputy Speaker, is vaccines. Progress continues on the development and deployment of vaccines, and we're determined to give those developing vaccines all the support they need. I can inform the House that we're initiating human challenge trials to speed up the development of a coronavirus vaccine and to improve further its safety. We're contributing £33 million to back these trials, joining forces with academia and industry. What a human challenge trial involves is taking a vaccine candidate that has been proven to be safe in trials, and giving it to a small number of carefully selected, healthy adult volunteers who are then exposed to the virus in a safe and controlled environment, closely monitored by medics and scientists, and that gives us the chance to accelerate the understanding of promising vaccines that have been through those clinical trials, so we can improve on their safe development. And the UK is one of the only countries in the world with the capability to run this kind of programme, and we should all be proud that once again we're leading on this global effort. Madam Deputy Speaker, our response to this lethal virus has been one of the greatest collective endeavours that this nation has seen. And thanks to those efforts, we are better prepared this time round. As a nation, we built the Nightingale hospitals in just 9 days. As a nation, we came together as one to protect the NHS, and it wasn't overwhelmed. And now the NHS is better yet prepared still. As a nation, we built the biggest testing capability of all our peers, and we've made huge and historic advances in vaccines and treatments. We understand this virus infinitely more than at the start of this pandemic, but we are not there yet, not when the virus is spreading at pace. So we must, each of us, look at what we can do and the role we can play and what actions we can take, because we've seen throughout this pandemic, we're at our best when we come together, and we know that with science on our side, ultimately, we will prevail.
The question is that this House has considered COVID-19. Colleagues will see there are a large number of contributors to this debate, so I will impose an immediate 5-minute time limit on backbench contributions. Shadow Secretary of State Jonathan Ashworth.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and given the numbers who are interested in the debate, and given that I've enjoyed the indulgence of the House now 4 days in a row, I'm not sure what I'm going to do next week, Madam Deputy Speaker. I might just come here and make a speech for the sake of it. I will try to be brief. And can I also apologise to the House because of a long-standing commitment? I won't be here for wind-ups. Can I apologise for that discourtesy to the House? On this occasion, I have spoken to Mr. Speaker about that, and he understands the particular circumstances. So I noticed that the Secretary of State has updated the House on Slough, Stoke-on-Trent and Coventry. He didn't mention anything about Nottinghamshire and West Yorkshire, and he will know that they are candidates that are widely speculated as to be as the next to go into the Tier 3 lockdown restrictions. I just wonder, given the localised infection rates in parts of Nottinghamshire, for example in Gedling 370 per 100,000, in Rushcliffe 362 per 100,000, in parts of West Yorkshire like Wakefield 307 per 100,000, in Calderdale 307 per 100,000, he must be considering the future of West Yorkshire and Nottinghamshire, and I'm just aware that we're going into the parliamentary recess. I don't know if I can just invite him to say anything now, because I know members from those areas will be concerned that with Parliament not sitting next week, they might not have an opportunity to put their points to him or get their points on the record. And I think it would be important, perhaps, if he doesn't want to say anything now, the Minister of State, in summing up, could perhaps offer some reassurance to people in that part of the world as to what might be happening in the coming... Of course.
As previously announced, discussions are underway. We want to proceed in consultation with and working with the local areas. And of course, with parliamentary recess next week, we will find a way to ensure that colleagues are appraised of the situation, preferably in advance of any announcement.
Well, I'm truly grateful for that reassurance, because he will understand that many people in those areas will be concerned, and the members will want to get their points of view on the record on that front. So I'm grateful for that reassurance. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, this virus has caused a pandemic because it exploits ambivalence and takes advantage of our human vulnerabilities. It undermines our biological defences and spreads through through human social behaviour and clustering. And we know that people with long-term chronic conditions particularly are vulnerable. And we know there's a greater burden of illness in our more disadvantaged areas, which COVID cruelly exaggerates. And we know as we entered this crisis, we had less resilience as a society. We entered with life expectancy falling for some of the poorest and stalling nationwide. And life expectancy is a summary of our overall health, Madam Deputy Speaker. And in recent years, the amount of life in good health has decreased for men and women these past 10 years. Our child mortality rates are some of the worst in Europe. And poor health and chronic illness leaves communities acutely vulnerable to this disease. So it should come as no surprise to any of us that some of the boroughs currently fighting the most virulent fires are some of the very poorest in our country, with the very worst life expectancy. So as well as diagnostics and therapeutics and vaccinations, and I welcome the progress that is being made in those fronts and that the Secretary of State has updated us on today, as well as expanding the mass testing, which we welcome, the saliva testing and the lateral flow testing, and I hope, by the way, that he's going to invest in our great universities who are developing some of these saliva-based testing, because they will need the equipment and the labs to process it. He'll probably need to invest in sort of robotics and AI to do some of that, because there isn't enough staff to do it at the moment, and I hope that is part of his agenda. But as well as all that now, because the virus is endemic, we will need a health inequality strategy as well to get on top of this virus for the long term. But in the immediate term, we also need to adjust our behaviours to bring infection rates down, which is why I've supported the restrictions, the difficult restrictions that he's had to impose, and it's why we are saying we need clarity all the time from government. But people also want to know that there is light at the end of the tunnel, because it is still not clear to families in Bury and Hayward and Penistone and all these other places that have been put under lockdown in recent days how they will escape lockdown. We still don't know whether the restrictions across the north will be lifted when the national R falls below 1, or when local regionalised R values fall below 1. We still don't know if restrictions will be lifted across the north when hospital admissions stabilise. Now, yesterday the Prime Minister said decisions are based on a number of things, including the R, but of course rates of infection, rates of admission to hospital and other data. But he didn't tell us what that other data is. So I hope, again, perhaps the Minister, in responding to the debate, can outline how an area in the north, in Tier 3, gets out of these restrictions. Because I know that these areas will be reviewed every 4 weeks. But what is the criteria to inform those reviews? Now, I represent Leicester, Madam Deputy Speaker. We are now in Tier 2. But we've been in a version of restriction for 114 days. We went directly from national lockdown to local lockdown. And in fact, we endured tougher restrictions than those designated for Tier 3 at the moment. Our hospitality closed, but our non-essential retail closed. Our schools closed. I didn't agree with that, but our schools closed as well. And all those measures together did help to bring infections down in Leicester. We went down to around 55 per 100,000. Well, to be frank, many members here would bite your hand off now for 55 per 100,000. And even at 55 per 100,000, we remained in a version of lockdown. And now, months later, after all the sacrifice we took in Leicester, after our businesses being closed, after the mental health impact of people not being able to see their loved ones, or families denied the opportunity to visit a care home to see their grandmother or mother, after months of that, our infection rates in Leicester today are 219 per 100,000. So the Secretary of State will have to forgive me when I express some scepticism that the approach he is taking will work and will suppress the virus to the levels which are sufficient to bring the R value down. Because although the early restrictions in Leicester did have an impact, after months, we're still under restrictions with infection rates at over 200 per 100 per 100,000. Now, the Secretary of State updated us on the situation we're in, and he's been very good at updating the House repeatedly, and I have no criticism of him at all on that front. And the growth rate in the virus is slower than March. It is a more muted growth in the virus compared to March, and that is thanks to the great sacrifices of the British people, of hand hygiene, of the social distancing, and everything we are doing. But it's not plateauing. This is an autumn resurgence we are dealing with at the moment. And for all the heat and fallout we've had across the House this week, the truth is the virus is at worrying levels everywhere. The national R is between 1.3 and 1.5. The R across the south east is between 1.3 and 1.5. Across the southwest, between 1.3 and 1.6. Across the east of England, 1.3 to 1.5. Now, of course, admissions to critical care are concentrated in the North and the Midlands at the moment. But at this stage in the first wave, those admissions to critical care were beginning to come down. They are continuing to go up. Now, it's right that improvements in care means that people are less likely to die. That is a good thing. We all celebrate that. But general and acute beds are filling up with COVID patients across the North and across the Midlands. Now, we know the Prime Minister has rejected a circuit break for now. He doesn't rule it out indefinitely. He's only rejected it for now, and we think he should have taken advantage of next week's half-term. He's decided not to do that. But we should remind ourselves that SAGE advised for the circuit break on 21st of September. A month later, on 21st of October, we had the grim statistics: 191 deaths, 996 hospital admissions, 6,431 in hospital, 629 on ventilation, 26,688 tested positive, and 249,978 cases in the past 14 days. Many will ask how much of that could have been avoided had the Prime Minister gone along with the advice of SAGE a month ago. Now, today the Chancellor in his statement said we have to find a balance between saving lives and protecting livelihoods. But I don't believe the two are in conflict. It's not a trade-off. I actually don't believe the Secretary of State believes it's a trade-off. He's made the tone of his remarks was very different to the tone of the comments from the Chancellor earlier. Saving lives and protecting livelihoods go hand in hand. And my worry is that the approach he is adopting, while understandable, because nobody wants to be in a lockdown, none of these decisions are easy decisions. None of these decisions don't have negative consequences. I think we're all mature enough across the House to appreciate that and understand that. But my worry is that the approach the government are currently taking means that there will by necessity need to be tougher, deeper action in the weeks to come. We're only in autumn. Winter has not hit us yet. Indeed, Professor John Edmonds of the London School of Hygiene yesterday at one of the select committees said there's no way we come out of this wave now without counting our deaths in the tens of thousands. I think we're looking at a quite bleak situation unless we take action. I don't think we should be taking action just specifically in the highest risk areas, but I think we need to take action everywhere. A similar sentiment is expressed by Sir Jeremy Farrar, who's also on stage. Now, for balance, Professor Van Tam at the press conference this week said he disagreed. But he also said we may have to push a little harder on the pedal to get it under control. So look, I know the Secretary of State is a decent man. He's been very good throughout this crisis in talking to me privately, as you'd expect a Secretary of State and a Shadow Secretary of State to have those discussions. Whenever I've asked for briefings, all the way back to January, he's ensured that the CMO would give me confidential briefings, as I'm sure every member across the House would understand and appreciate. So I know he's a decent man. I know he's not playing games or anything like that. And I know that these are difficult judgment calls of extraordinary gravity. And I know there's no easy solution. Everything has trade-offs. Everything has negative consequences. But we also know that unless we take decisive action, the consequences could be even worse. And no one should pretend to the House that is not the case. And there is a worry that by not taking action now, we will, in the words of Professor David Hunter, an epidemiologist at Oxford, that we would all wind up in Tier 3 eventually. And indeed, according to Times Radio yesterday, they were saying government sources were telling them that the government is now planning a 3-week circuit break next month across all Tier 2 and Tier 3 areas. Now, if that is the case, then the government should probably level with us so we can all start preparing for it. But this isn't just about minimising harm and deaths from COVID, as the Secretary of State said, and in responding to questions from my honourable friends, that we have a huge responsibility and duty to minimise harm and deaths from non-COVID conditions as well. And we have to avoid the situation that we were in spring, when we took when the immense lockdown, which was actually a number of different interventions all at once, meant that to build surge capacity in the National Health Service, we had to cancel elective operations, we had to free up general and acute beds, and many important diagnostics work got delayed and treatment got delayed. That left us with a situation where today there's 110,000 people waiting beyond 12 months for treatment, compared to just 1,600 in January, it's left us with a situation where 3 million people are waiting for breast, bowel or cervical screening and more people are waiting for treatment. But my worry is that we'll end up building a greater backlog in treatment if we don't act, because general and acute beds are filling up. We have a number of hospitals cancelling electives already. Bradford has just suspended non-urgent surgery. Birmingham is talking about suspending non-urgent surgery. It's happening in Nottingham. We know Merseyside is under considerable pressure. The Secretary of State outlined it. And it's just been revealed in the Health Service Journal that we're heading into this winter with 2,000 beds less than we had last winter. And today, the Royal College of Emergency Medicine has warned that over half of A&Es across the country are caring for patients in corridors due to lack of beds. And we're not even in winter yet. And our overcrowded A&Es aren't ideal at the best of times, but during a COVID pandemic, it's quite obviously highly dangerous to be treating patients in corridors of A&Es. That's why the President of the Royal College, Catherine Henderson, has pointed out this situation will put more lives at risk than it ever did before. So if the government really want to drive down infections and suppress the virus and ensure that general and acute beds are not overwhelmed and that more operations are not cancelled, then I think they have to seriously consider what steps they need to take and go further. Now, I accept we've probably missed the window of opportunity now unless the Secretary of State, unless the Minister of State is going to get up at the end of this debate and say, actually, we're going to do a circuit breaker over half-term next week. I accept the government have probably missed that window of opportunity now. But at some point, they will have to take further action. Just for a final point, Madam Deputy Speaker, we could have avoided much of this if test and trace had been more effective. The Secretary of State is spending $12 billion on this programme. $12 billion is a colossal amount of money. Some of it's going in consultants of £7,000 a day, but where on earth is the rest of it going? We're throwing around figures in this COVID debate and we're sort of becoming quite complacent and relaxed about them. $12 billion is an extraordinary amount of money. You could probably run the NHS for about a month or so on $12 billion. And now we learn that the system today has only failed to has only contacted 59.6% of contacts. That's the equivalent of failing to contact 101,000 people. This isn't world-beating. It's a world-beating shambles, Madam Deputy Speaker. So I really hope that they look at stripping all these failing private outsourcing firms like Serco of these contracts and putting the local public health teams in charge. It would be much more effective, Madam Deputy Speaker. I will, but I'm going to finish because I know there's many people who want to.
I'm going to my honourable friend giving way. I just wanted to pick up a point about the app and the fact that it's telling people to self-isolate. However, it doesn't give people a code in which they need to process that, so they're not able to claim their £500. This is creating chaos across local authorities. Does he not agree that the government need to really get on top of this quickly?
Absolutely, there have been problems with the app. I mean, my app, when I'm in Leicester, tells me that I'm in an area that is of both medium and high alert. Well, Leicester's been under lockdown for 100 days. How can it say that in the bit of Leicester that I live in, Madam Deputy Speaker? Yes, of course.
I was hoping that I thought that the honourable gentleman's comments were very thoughtful until we got to this bit of unnecessary political knockabout at the end. I just want to make a couple of factual points. On the app, because the app only takes the first two parts of your postcode, some of those do spread over two different alert levels, and that's why it describes the situation in Leicester, making sure that if people press the button on the app to ensure they can get access to the £500 payment for the low paid in self-isolation, that button is there on the app. And I just want to leap to the defence of test and trace, Madam Deputy Speaker, because in the last fortnight, the number of contacts and cases that have been reached has doubled. The distance travelled over the last just over a month to get a test has halved, and the turnaround time for tests that are sent to care homes, which are critical for saving lives, that has come down. There are over 50 statistics published every Thursday on test and trace, and of course the honourable gentleman can look through that 50 and find a couple that are going in the wrong direction and complain about them, but I think it's better to have a balanced opinion.
I mean, there's a spirited defence, but the statistics have been bad every week, Madam Deputy Speaker, because he knows that, because I've been raising it with him every week.
Every week he looks through the 50 statistics, finds the ones that aren't going in the right direction. I'm merely pointing out that the system is doing much, much more than it ever has. And I'll tell you one of the places that the huge amount of money that we're putting into test and trace goes, Madam Deputy Speaker, and that's the record amount of testing capacity that we have, now over 370,000. So I think what he should do is stand up and thank all the people who are delivering on this colossal effort.
I'm very happy to thank the people working in test and trace. Of course, I'm happy to thank them, but that's not a U-turn. Thanking the staff is not a U-turn. We're on the side of the workers on this side of the House, Madam Deputy Speaker. He's on the side of the bosses. Of course, we're happy to thank the staff working on test and trace, but he cannot seriously look at these statistics and tell us that this is an effective system. I mean, certainly, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster didn't defend it. I mean, he said on the Mar show on Sunday, when he was asked about these statistics, that any test and trace system of whatever kind has less utility when the virus is accelerating. So perhaps if he thinks there's a good set of statistics, he should send them to the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, because he had a different line to take on Sunday from the one in which the Secretary of State has just put from the dispatch box. Now let me come to my conclusion, because I know there's many who want to speak in this debate. So look. He says leave out the knockabout. He's the one who's started it off. All right. So the problem is, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that we went into this pandemic with an NHS underfunded, public health cut back, but with less resilience as a society. And I think what this pandemic has shown is that in the future now, is that this will not be the only pandemic we have to deal with. Climate change, urbanisation, deforestation and things like that means we are likely to see more viruses jump from animals to humans. So the big challenge for us now as a society is that when we come through this pandemic, as we will, is that we have to start building the health security to protect us for the future, because unfortunately, all of us across this House are going to be dealing with more of these pandemics in the years to come.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I draw the House's attention to my outside interests, and also that this is the first time I have sought to catch your eye, Madam Deputy Speaker, since in any of the COVID debates. And I want to express very strong support for my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary. He has an impossibly difficult job to do, and we should all support him, and in my view, he's doing it very well indeed. I also want to express my gratitude and admiration for the health facilities in my own constituency, in particular Good Hope Hospital. And what I want to suggest today is just to encourage a few small changes when they are possible. If I may use a nautical metaphor, an adjustment on the tiller. I'm pleased to see that my right honourable friend is working far more with members of Parliament. The wisdom from our constituencies, as we report back in this House from the front line, I think is very important and should play a critical part in the government reaching its conclusions. I also think that working very closely with local authorities and mayors, not easy, not always elegant, but vital for success, what he wants to achieve, is very important. And in Birmingham, where for many years I've not had much nice to say about Birmingham City Council, I do want to record that the public health authorities under Justin Varney are, I think, doing an exceptional job under the regional mayor, Andy Street, whose leadership we all admire. And it should also be said that Birmingham City Council did a first-class job in dealing with the homeless at the start of this pandemic and making sure they all had somewhere to go off the street. So we have politicians who never agree on anything in the West Midlands, I think it would be fair to say, since March, have worked closely together and have established a very good working relationship. This is not a political crisis, this is a health crisis, and we should all play our part in keeping the aggro levels down, and I thought that the two front benches set a very good example today. In the trade-offs ministers inevitably must make between protecting our health and the health service and protecting jobs, livelihoods and investment, I would push the tiller a bit more towards the economy and economic activities. I'm lost in admiration at the ingenuity and even impressive optimism and vitality of the private sector in Sutton Coldfield as I visit their businesses and hear their determination but also their anxiety. And if I may just mention two sectors, the first is the events and exhibitions sector, which employs 600,000 people. It has a turnover
each year of about £80 billion. That's roughly the same as the automotive industry. And Solutions 2 in Minworth in my constituency, which I visited a couple of weeks ago, previously with a £6 million turnover, has had a turnover of precisely £8,000 since March this year. They have 36 staff, 35 of them are furloughed, and they showed me a map of Europe which showed that there was activity in their sector across Europe, in the Middle East and in the Far East, but not, alas, in this country. And they pointed out to me that in Dusseldorf, an exhibition had taken place for the Caravan Show, and 107,000 people had visited it. The second sector I just wish briefly to mention is weddings and the marriage industry. I have seen that this is flat on its back in Sutton Coldfield. More could be done, in my view, to relax the tight restrictions in favour of COVID-sensible arrangements. And I hope perhaps we can show some flexibility in this. It extends to venues like Moore Hall, it's the wedding car industry. All of these things are very badly affected. Now, thirdly, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think I know the Prime Minister well enough to say at heart he is a social liberal, and he dislikes the massive extension of the state as much as I do. The framework of restrictions and ways of living, the language of authority, curfews, lockdowns, compliances, bans, along with the machinery of coercion, informing, policing, snitching, fining. I was horrified to hear this morning that 4 students in Nottingham have been fined £10,000 each for breaching the rules, more than a year's fees. It's particularly the lives and opportunities of young people blighted by this dreadful, that is being blighted by this dreadful pandemic. We probably need to protect the elderly and vulnerable a little more and shield and curtail the young a little less. It's about a touch on the tiller, always a little less didactic, a little more trusting in the good sense of social solidarity of the vast majority. And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, mental health. I'm a former party member of the APPG, along with Alistair Campbell and with Norman Lamb, probably the best public health minister, or one of them, we've had since the war. We are facing a mental ill health epidemic. People inevitably not being seen, who really should be. We must keep this issue very much at the front of all our minds as this crisis continues.
Anne McLaughlin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'd like to start by acknowledging that the Government is in an unenviable position. Yeah. This is a tough gig. You know, everybody, I see the Health Secretary agreeing with me somewhat, everybody on these islands is tired at the moment. But those making the tough decisions don't have that option to give in to the tiredness. So I do want to start by saying that I might not always agree with everything they're doing, and I don't generally agree with most of what they do, but I understand that everybody's an expert these days. And I also want to say, that some of what they did to respond to the pandemic was good. Furloughing was not just good, it was fantastic. And I'm not going to qualify that. It was a great idea. It wasn't, an idea that we only had on these islands, but it was a great idea. And I have to say, I sat and I watched the Chancellor initially, and I thought he was fast, he was flexible, he was responsive. I felt at that point the ideology had gone, the politics had been taken out of the situation, and the Government were simply doing what they could to support people as best they could. In fact, I remember thinking, we're going to see the Chancellor on spitting image, and I'm sure he's going to be wrapped in a red flag. So socialist were some of those policies in terms of the furloughing. And we also heard about people slipping through the net, and of course, because everybody keeps saying this, we're in unprecedented times. So we had those Paymaster General calls every day, and much of what we reported was acted upon initially. It was a terrible, terrible time, but it was a good time for politicians to work together in the interests of the 4 countries of these islands. But not everything was acted on. Not everyone was supported. Some of those gaps were never filled. And I want to mention just 2 things in particular, and one is the wholesalers. So in my constituency, I have many, many wholesalers who chose not to furlough their staff because they wanted to play their part in responding to the pandemic. They wanted to ensure the flow of food and drink, and particularly to hospitals. And they felt, and I know there was something said in the earlier statement today, which I haven't yet seen, but they certainly have felt for a long time that they were not responded to. And I wrote to the Chancellor asking about it. And I want to just say something about the responses that I've been getting, because there was a point of order earlier about this. Some of these responses come back, there's no reference. When we put a reference, they don't put a reference back. One of the complaints from the point of order was that there was a 6-word response to a question. Well, I got an 8-page response to something, and I have to tell you, I have no idea what the question was, because as I say, they didn't give me the reference. But in addition to that, it just seemed to be 8 pages of "isn't the government great?" and that's just not acceptable. And I don't know why the replies are like this. I wonder if it is an attempt to try and stop us asking in the first place, because I'm certainly giving up sometimes. The people who haven't given up is the people that have been formed the campaign organisation, they excluded, and I'm part of the APPG on the excluded in here. And I mean, they have been incredible, but they're in really difficult positions, and I too would have been in their position had I not won my seat in December. Madam Deputy Speaker, I was self-employed, but I hadn't been self-employed long enough. And I won't go into the details, but I absolutely know that if I were one of them right now, I would not be living in the home that I've lived in for 10 years. I don't know what would have happened to me. So I really do identify with them, and I want to keep supporting them. I want to just say something again about universal credit. It was really good that the government added the £1,000 a year on. I mean, it was good, but it had been cut to the extent that really it's just brought it back up to 2011 levels. But on the other hand, I didn't expect a Conservative government to do that, and I'm glad that they did. But they need to extend it, and they need to add it to legacy benefits. And I would implore them to do that, and I would implore them to extend the furlough scheme. And whenever it's mentioned in this place, members opposite shout, for how long can we do that? We can't sustain it forever, but it isn't forever. And just because we don't know exactly how long it is, we can estimate, we can reasonably suppose that by next summer there will be some kind of normality, so why not extend it until then if needs be? One of the things that I have noticed throughout the last few months is some terrible situations with employers, and I have many examples, but I've already given some when I spoke in the whistleblowers debate a while back. I want to raise one today because I'm hoping that members opposite will do something about it. It's a very serious matter. The employer is the government, and whoever took the decision that I'm going to tell you about should be ashamed of themselves. So there are 3 service centres in Glasgow for the DWP. Those people working in those service centres, the ones that don't have to do face-to-face, and this will not just be in Glasgow, I'm just telling you what's happening in Glasgow. I imagine this is widespread across these islands. But workers there were on a work-from-home pilot scheme, and some teams were allowed to work 4 days a week at home and 1 day in the office. Others were 3 weeks at home, 1 week in the office. And on the 23rd of September, when the Prime Minister and the First Minister both instructed that anybody who can work from home should work from home, those workers naturally expected that they were going to be allowed to work from home full-time. But they were refused permission to do that. Now, some of these workers, they're all kitted out at home. Some of them are having to bring their equipment into the office on that 1 day of the week or that 1 week of the month. And they had to bring their in, despite what the government was saying people should do. And they were constantly being told that it was fine, it was safe, there was no danger to them. Well, that's not what the government were saying. So the week ending the 9th of October, it was announced that 2 members of staff had tested positive in that building. On the 12th of October, another 3 members of staff were reported to have tested positive. On the 15th of October, a further 2 members of staff, that's 7 cases in less than a week. On the 19th of October, Monday of this week, there was another 1. And on the 20th of October, on Tuesday, there were another 2, so what's that, 10? And you can understand, surely, the fears that these workers were experiencing. But I'll tell you who didn't understand, or maybe they did and they just didn't care. On Friday, last Friday, a senior manager at the DWP held a Skype meeting with those teams to reassure them that the office was safe and to remind them that the pilot cannot be changed and there can be no flexibility, despite what the Prime Minister and First Minister were telling employers to do. Now, I understand that the tone was more threatening than reassuring. The senior manager warned that if workers continued to raise concerns, the pilot may be cancelled and they would all be forced to work in the office full-time. She hoped that would not have to happen. That is bullying, Madam Deputy Speaker. That's workplace bullying. And I hope the Secretary of State will raise it with the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. I certainly will be. Now, yesterday, just to bring you up to date, staff were told that the pilot had been suspended. Now, that's good in the short term because all those who can work from home are now doing so full-time. But there's no information and no answer to their questions about how this will progress. And given the threats that speaking out might mean the pilot being cancelled and everyone being forced to work in the office, one can be forgiven for thinking that that is what is going to happen. So I just want to ask a few questions. Why, if they could work from home, if they were equipped to work from home, why were they forced to work in the office? Of the 10 so far testing positive there, how many were part of the work from home pilot? How can a government agency be given permission to ignore the restrictions everyone else is rightly following? Will management punish these unruly dissenters who complained about it by forcing them all to work in the office, as was suggested by the senior manager? And does the government understand the message the workers are getting? You don't matter, you have no power. Well, not only do they have no power, their MPs seem to have no influence. My attempts to represent my constituents started on the 4th of October when I had a meeting with senior managers of the DWP. I had just been made aware of this. The meeting was about something else. I said I urgently needed to know who to contact to raise this on behalf of these people. And that was the 4th of October, and yesterday was the 21st, was it? And that was when they got back to me after being prompted 3 times. I've waited 17 days, and their response was, you might need to give us some more information. If I can't represent them as an MP, if I can't make any difference to their lives, and if they can't as workers, then who else can? Madam Deputy Speaker, you're looking at me like you want me to stop. Oh no, that's excellent. Right, okay.
I'm sure she is aware that there are a great number of speakers, but I'm quite happy for her to finish her remarks. Yes.
For less than half the time of the other spokesperson, which I thought his speech was great anyway. So, right, okay, well, I'm going to have to figure out. I just want to talk about somebody else that's been prevented from working from home, and that is MPs. MPs can participate virtually when it comes to question sessions, and when it comes to voting, they can nominate a proxy, but they cannot participate in debates like this. Now, I heard the Leader of the House confirm this morning that the virtual Parliament will be extended to Easter. So we can speak in question sessions and we can nominate a proxy vote, but we cannot take part in debates which are the lifeblood of a democracy. And I was interested in the so-called reasoning behind it this morning when my friend, the Honourable Member for Edinburgh East, questioned again why MPs who cannot be here in person cannot participate in debates virtually. His speaker was muted and there was a 10-second gap whilst that was resolved. 10 seconds. The Leader of the House then used that as a justification for not allowing virtual debates. But he just said question sessions were fine to participate in virtually, and the question session they were in had a glitch of 10 seconds. But you know what? The question got asked, the question got answered, the roof didn't cave in, and nobody came to any harm. And no catastrophe would fall upon us if such a glitch were to happen in the course of a debate. So why does this place, that many like to think of as the mother of all parliaments, the great bastion of democracy, why does it silence the voices of those MPs who, through no fault of their own, cannot be here in person? Worse, why does it silence the voices of their constituents? Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm actually going to stop there, even though I have a good 8 minutes more, because I know there are lots of people who want to get in.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for being so understanding. I'm going to reduce the time limit to 4 minutes, but I think some members need to brace themselves for the fact that not everybody will get in. But I would like to point out that there is a whole day's debate on Monday, the 2nd of November, the day we come back, on COVID-19 as well. Dr. Luke Evans.
Thank you, Chair, and it's a pleasure to be able to speak in the general COVID update debate. And last time I spoke, I welcomed the tiered approach that the government put in place to dealing with the COVID virus. And today I'm